Friday nights had always been our thing. While other couples went out for fancy dinners or movie dates, Lori and I stayed in, battling it out over a chessboard. It was our ritual, a tradition born out of mutual stubbornness and an unspoken agreement that neither of us could resist a good challenge. That night started no differently. I poured 2 glasses of wine and set up the board while Lori scrolled through her phone on the couch, her legs tucked under her. "You ready to lose?" I teased, placing her pieces on her side of the board. She looked up with a smirk, setting her phone aside. Bold talk for someone who hasn't won in weeks. We took our usual seats, the familiar rhythm of moving pawns and knights filling the quiet of the living room. But as the game progressed, I noticed something odd. "Where's your queen?" I asked, scanning the board. Lori frowned, leaning forward. "I don't know. Maybe it's under the couch or something." I got up to check. "Under the couch? Really? That's where your queen is hiding." "Stranger things have happened," she replied with a shrug, sipping her wine. I crouched down, feeling around for the missing piece. My fingers brushed against dust and a forgotten hair tie, but no queen. With a sigh, I moved to the shelf where we kept the chess sets box. That's when I saw it. Her phone, left unlocked, sat face up on the shelf. A message notification glowed on the screen. "Marcos, can't wait to see you tomorrow." "Same time?" The words hit me like a slap. I stood frozen, staring at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's taking so long?" Lori called from the table, her tone light, oblivious. I grabbed the phone, trying to steady my breathing as I walked back into the room. "Who's Marcos?" I asked, holding it up for her to see. Lori's face didn't betray much, a slight widening of her eyes, a tightening of her jaw. But then she smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She leaned back in her chair, her expression cool, almost bored. "It's just business, Jake. You wouldn't understand. Try me." Her smile faded, replaced by something colder. "Trust me, you don't want to know the details." The way she said it made my blood run cold. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't defensive. She was dismissive, like I wasn't worth the explanation. I set her phone on the table, my hands trembling. "You're going to tell me the truth, Lori. Or I'll find it out myself." She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "Do what you have to do, Jake." Her words hung in the air, daring me to act. That was the moment I knew, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built my life around, was hiding something far bigger than a missing chess piece. The next morning, Lori acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the kitchen in her silk robe, making coffee and humming softly to herself. It was almost impressive how easily she slipped back into our routine, as if the night before hadn't completely shattered my trust. I couldn't ignore it, though. The message from Marcos replayed in my mind like a broken record. Who was he? And what was Lori hiding? "Any plans today?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I leaned against the counter. She didn't even glance up. "Just errands. I might stop by the boutique downtown and grab a few things." "Need company?" She hesitated, her hands pausing mid-motion. "I'll probably be quick," she said with a smile that felt forced. "Nothing exciting." I nodded, but inside, my suspicions grew. By the time she left, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers. I pulled out my laptop and began searching. I looked up her recent credit card transactions, scanning for anything unusual. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a series of charges at high-end restaurants, boutique hotels, and a suspiciously expensive gift shop. All places I'd never been with her. My heart sank further with each discovery. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. His name was Tom, a gruff, no-nonsense guy who looked like he'd seen it all. "Your wife's hiding something, huh?" he said as he scribbled notes in a worn leather notebook. That's what I need to find out, I replied, sliding over the list of transactions I'd found. Start here. I need to know who Marcos is and what she's doing when I'm not around. Tom nodded. Give me a few days. I'll get you answers. Waiting was the hardest part. Lori continued to act like everything was normal, laughing at my jokes, kissing me goodnight, even curling up next to me on the couch to watch TV. But every smile, every touch, felt like a lie. I started noticing other things, too. The way her phone was always face down on the table. The way she'd step outside to take calls, claiming it was work. The way she'd brush off my questions with vague answers and a quick change of subject. Each little detail chipped away at the image of the woman I thought I knew. When Tom finally called, his voice was grim. Jake, I've got something, he said. But you're not gonna like it. My stomach dropped. Tell me. Your wife's been meeting with a guy named Marcos Hernandez. He's got a reputation, a con artist, specializing in scams and blackmail. And get this, they've been working together. It looks like they've been targeting people for months. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Working together? Yeah. From what I've found, Lori's been helping him lure people into traps. Fancy dinners, fake business deals, compromising photos, you name it. Their latest mark? Tom paused, his tone heavy. It's you, Jake. They've been setting you up. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I tried to process what I'd just heard. Lori wasn't just hiding an affair, she was betraying me on a level I hadn't even imagined. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I've got the receipts, man, Tom said. Literally. Bank transfers, emails, surveillance photos. She's in deep. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, my hands trembling. Lori's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. Cold. Ruthless. And now, I had a choice to make. I could confront her, demand answers, scream and yell until my voice gave out. Or I could play the game she didn't know I'd already started. I stared at the chessboard still sitting on the table from the night before, my thoughts swirling. If Lori thought she could outsmart me, she had no idea who she was up against. This wasn't just her game anymore. It was mine. The moment I hung up the phone, everything shifted. I wasn't just a betrayed husband anymore. I was a player in Lori's game, a game she didn't realize I knew the rules to. That evening, I went through the motions of normalcy, smiling when necessary, answering her casual questions about my day. She didn't notice the way my eyes lingered a little longer on her movements or the slight edge in my voice. I was no longer her opponent. I was her predator. The next morning, I called Tom. I need everything you have, I said. Emails, photos, the works. Send it all to me. Got it, Tom replied. What's the plan? I stared at the chessboard still sitting on the dining table, one piece missing. I'm going to give her a taste of her own medicine. The first move was subtle. I started keeping track of her every word, every action. When she left for her appointments, I followed her from a distance, making note of where she went and who she met. It didn't take long to spot Marcos. He was everything I imagined, smooth, well-dressed, and exuding the kind of charm that screamed trouble. They met at a quiet cafe, sitting in the far corner where they likely assumed no one would notice them. I watched from outside, my stomach churning as Lori leaned in, laughing at something he said. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Over the next few days, I pieced together their entire operation. Using the information Tom had gathered, I discovered how they'd been targeting wealthy couples, exploiting their vulnerabilities, and extorting money with fabricated evidence of affairs or shady business deals. Their latest scam was me. Marcos had been coaching Lori on how to manipulate me into handing over control of our joint assets, subtly planting the idea that I wasn't capable of managing them myself. They were playing the long game, but they'd underestimated me. The trap was simple but effective. I invited Lori out for dinner, choosing a high-end restaurant she loved. I acted relaxed, even affectionate, playing the part of the doting husband. She didn't suspect a thing. "Jake," she said over dessert, "this is nice. I feel like we haven't done something like this in ages." "Yeah," I replied, swirling my wine glass. I thought it was time for a change. She smiled, her eyes warm. If I didn't know better, I might have believed the act. "Speaking of change," I said, leaning forward, "I've been thinking about our finances." Her expression didn't falter, but I saw the flicker of interest in her eyes. "Oh? What about them?" "I think we should move some things around," I said casually. "You know, maybe put more in your name. It'd make things easier in case something ever happened to me." Lori's smile widened, just enough to confirm my suspicions. "That's really thoughtful of you, Jake." I returned her smile, hiding the satisfaction bubbling beneath the surface. She thought she was winning. The next day, I finalized my plan. With Tom's help, I'd already alerted the authorities about Lori and Marcos's scheme. All I needed was her confession. That evening, I set the stage. I invited her to the living room, pouring us both a glass of wine and pulling the chessboard between us. "Let's play," I said, my tone light. Lori raised an eyebrow. "Feeling confident tonight?" "Something like that," I replied, moving my pawn. The game unfolded slowly, each move calculated, each word carefully chosen. "Lori," I said finally, as she reached for her rook, "why did you marry me?" She hesitated, her hand hovering over the board. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one," I said, meeting her gaze. "Why me? Why us?" She laughed softly, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Because I love you, Jake." "Isn't that obvious?" "Love," I repeated, leaning back. "Is that what you call it when you team up with someone like Marcos to destroy someone's life?" The color drained from her face, and her hand froze mid-move. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice a shaky whisper. I leaned forward, pulling out my phone. With a single tap, I played the audio Tom had recorded from one of their meetings, her voice, clear as day, plotting their next move. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. You've been spying on me?" "Don't turn this around," I said coldly. "You thought you could play me, Lori. But you forgot one thing." She didn't answer, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't lose," I said, moving my queen into place. "Checkmate." As I stood, the sound of sirens filled the air. The authorities had arrived, just as planned. Lori's expression crumbled as she realized what was happening. "Jake, please." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "You've already said enough." The knock at the door signaled the end of her game. And the beginning of mine. The door slammed shut behind the officers as they led Lori away, her protests ringing hollow in my ears. I stood in the living room, staring at the chessboard still sitting on the table, her side abandoned mid-game. For years, I had believed that board symbolized us, our connection, our shared tradition, our unspoken language of challenge and trust. But now, all I could see was the irony. She had turned our game into something cruel, a twisted metaphor for her betrayal. The next few days passed in a blur. Marcos had also been taken into custody, his smug charm crumbling the moment he realized the law was onto him. The evidence Tom and I had collected was airtight. Lori and Marcos's scheme unraveled quickly, their victims coming forward to corroborate their crimes. It should have felt satisfying, like a victory. Instead, it felt hollow. One evening, Tom called to check in. "You okay, Jake?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted, swirling a glass of whiskey in my hand. "I got what I wanted, didn't I? The truth. Justice. But it doesn't feel like a win," he finished. I sighed. "Yeah." Tom's voice softened. "That's the thing about betrayal. Even when you take back control, you're left picking up the pieces. But hey, you've got something they don't. What's that? A chance to rebuild, he said firmly. They're done, Jake. You're not. His words stuck with me. Over the following weeks, I began to untangle myself from the wreckage Lori had left behind. I sold the house. It was too big, too full of memories I didn't want to carry anymore. I moved into a modest apartment on the edge of town, where the silence was less suffocating and the air felt lighter. I started focusing on work, picking up old hobbies I'd neglected, and reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in far too long. And then there was the chessboard. It had been packed away in one of the boxes I'd brought to the new apartment. For weeks, I ignored it, avoiding the reminder of what it had come to represent. But one rainy afternoon, I found myself pulling it out, setting it up on the small table by the window. I played against myself, moving each piece with deliberate care. It was quiet, meditative, a reminder that the game itself wasn't the enemy. It was what you made of it. Months later, I received the final update. Lori and Marcos had both been sentenced. Their names would fade into the background of my life, just distant echoes of a past I'd left behind. I thought about Lori sometimes, not the Lori who had betrayed me, but the woman I had once loved. I wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done, if she ever missed the life we'd built. But those thoughts were fleeting, replaced by the certainty that I was better off without her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stared down at the chessboard, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. This is my board now, I murmured to myself, moving my queen into position. My game. My rules. Checkmate. And this time, I knew I'd won. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.